The Shooting Range. In this episode, Pages of History, how to turn the Pershing into a heavy tank. Tactics and strategy, manual engine control, and Metal Beasts, the pure British fighter. In this episode, we'll talk about one of the most famous British jet fighters, the English electric Lightning F6. During the early 1950s, the Royal Air Force needed an interceptor to defend the islands against air raids. And the newest Lightning fighter jet handled this task with ease. In War Thunder, you can fly one of its latest modifications, the F6. Is propelled by two turbojet engines with afterburners. The fuel tanks are self-sealing, found in the wings and the lower part of the fuselage, next to the forward-facing cannons. The nose dome hides the radar system. As for suspended armament, you can choose between two types of air-to-air missiles, the Fire Streak and the Red Top. The choice of armament makes it clear that this is a pure fighter jet. Naturally, it performs best in air battles. Thanks to its two quite powerful engines, the Lightning shows one of the best horizontal and climbing speeds at BR 9.7. But don't forget that turbojet engines with afterburners consume ludicrous amounts of fuel. Top up your tanks before you fly. As for fixed armaments, this jet has the Aiden 30mm cannons that many pilots love so much. They can handle any enemy aircraft in a split second, should it be so careless as to fly into the sights. And the ammo is enough to last a few battles if you use it sparingly. Another trump card in this Brit's deck is the couple of unique Red Top air-to-air missiles. Each of them has 31 kilograms of TNT, enough to destroy anything that flies even without a direct hit. Your main tactics while flying the Lightning are frontal attacks at high speeds and boom and zoom. It's a heavy plane, so it's barely suitable for long maneuverable flights. Use your great climb rate to gain altitude at the beginning of the battle, and once you see the first enemies, you can safely attack them using your missiles and cannons. In mixed battles, the machine shows, well, mixed results. There are no bombs or rockets to fight ground targets, so the Lightning can only work as a fighter. It's still a very important job, of course. You can always choose the Lightning if the opposing team is leading in the skies. If you manage to destroy their air support, your allies will certainly thank you for that. Moreover, you can try to destroy enemy light vehicles with your cannons after that. Your cannon's AP shells can pierce up to 47 millimeters of armor, which is enough for an AA vehicle or an IFV. It's nothing more than a nice bonus though, since your ammo will only last a couple of volleys and your aircraft's weight makes exciting dives hard. Be careful not to crash into the ground in your dives. When the American military was getting ready to join the Western Front, they had obviously underestimated the German tanks. They saw that their Shermans had inferior armor and guns compared to the Tigers and Panthers, but assumed that such heavy and expensive tanks couldn't be mass-produced or mobile on the battlefield. They thought, okay, the Germans might win a few battles, but not the war. The D-Day proved to be a wake-up call. Yes, they had been right about the Tigers, but there was much more of the Panthers than they'd expected. They even showed quite a high off-road performance and mobility when they weren't being repaired. The Shermans had a hard time fighting against the Panthers with their thick frontal armor and good guns. But some new tanks were coming, the M26 Pershing. And then the Americans met the King Tiger. The King Tiger had no problems defeating any American tank while being invincible for the 90mm guns from the front. The Americans realized they urgently needed a new heavy tank to counter these beasts, and since they had nothing better than the Pershing, they went with it as the base for the new machine. They even launched several projects at once just to be safe. The first project was to install a more powerful 90mm gun onto the M26, similar to the German KWK-43 on the King Tiger. One of such tanks even managed to see some real action. Other projects were even more interesting. The Americans basically scaled the Pershing into a full-blown heavy tank. The chassis received an additional wheel and increased front armor. Thanks to more space, it could also fit a stronger 770 horsepower engine. The turret had a record armor thickness, almost 300 millimeters, and a longer 90mm gun. All of that received the name T-32. But the T-29 project went even further. Its hull was extended to fit as much as 8 wheels per track and a huge turret with 4 seats. There was enough space for a 105mm gun with 2 loaders and a commander seat in the rear. No wonder all of these improvements increased the weight into 64 tons, although the frontal armor looked weak compared to the 200mm of turret armor. It still wasn't enough. The new 90 and 105mm guns failed to penetrate the front of the King Tigers, so the Americans started developing the T-30 with a 155mm gun. That was the most powerful gun ever mounted on a tank at the time. However, it was too big even for the new turret, and its low fire rate made them bury the project. The most successful solution was the T-34 with a 120mm gun. It was much easier to reload, and armor-piercing shells could penetrate up to 200mm of armor inclined at 30 degrees. Even after the war, the work on heavy tanks continued. There was no urgency anymore, so the engineers mostly made a few prototypes for testing purposes. The prototypes were unreliable and failed constantly, but gave an opportunity to test all kinds of engines and transmissions, which proved useful later with the Patton and the M103. That was the end of complicated and expensive heavy tanks. Not long ago, we discussed tactics in dogfights and received dozens of questions about the pitch axis, radiator use, and other advanced mechanics. This topic deserves more than a few sentences in the hotline section, so here we go. Let's start with setting up the keys we'll need. Go to Controls, Aircraft, and then Full Reel Controls. This will give you additional options in the Manual Engine Control section. First of all, set up a convenient key for the engine controls mode. This will give you easy access to engine control in battle. Set up the mixture, propeller pitch, and radiators similarly to the roll and pitch axes. We recommend turning relative control on so that you can change these numbers smoothly. You'll also need to assign keys for toggle auto radiator and toggle auto prop pitch, since on some aircraft you might need them to get full manual control. There are even separate controls for different engines if your favorite plane has more than one. Now it's time to practice. In battle, you can press the key assigned to engine control mode, and you'll see on the bottom of your screen which systems are currently working on auto. The mixture shows the fuel-to-air ratio. When you're flying low, there's usually enough oxygen to make fuel burn efficiently, but the higher you go, the thinner the atmosphere gets, so sooner or later your engine will start choking. If it does, try adding less fuel. With some planes, it'll make the engine work as usual right away. But if the effect is negligible, you should check the supercharger that compresses the air before it gets into the combustion chamber. It usually has several stages for different altitudes. If you switch between these stages on time, you can preserve the optimal boost and keep the engine's power at its maximum. And if your plane has a turbocharger, which means no stages, check if there's a way to increase the RPM. Some models have that option. Our next point of interest is the propeller pitch. That changes the angle of the blades on your aircraft. When the pitch is at its maximum, or course, the blades are basically eating into the air. That requires a lot of work and thus reduces the RPM. When the pitch is at its minimum, or fine, the RPM gets off the charts because the blades meet very low resistance. Remember, when you see 100 on your screen, it means that the pitch is at its lowest rather than highest. If you push the control handle, the blades get 100% vertical, so the pitch becomes low, aka fine. And if you pull it, you make the pitch high, aka coarse, making the blade's angle almost 0 degrees. We hope that's clear now. Now, what pitch do I need in battle, you might ask? There's no single answer. Finding the perfect pitch is an art that distinguishes the real aces from, well, simply good pilots. It's a constant search for the perfect balance, a search for the optimal engine mode. Let's give you an example. We'll go fly the German TA-152H1 fighter. Set the thrust to maximum, set the pitch to 100% low, and start accelerating. The RPM is getting dangerously high. We don't want to kill the engine, so we first increase the pitch to 90 and then to 80, always checking the RPM indicator to keep it on a safe level. Looks like a perfect solution, right? You wish. Take the Bf-109 F4 and start taking off at 100%, and the RPM will go off the charts, destroying the engine before you even gain enough speed on the ground. So, you've got to study your aircraft and only experiment on test flights. Our next point is feathering. It's a separate function available on select aircraft. Feathering allows your rotor to align the blades with the airflow to minimize drag. It might come in handy in case of an engine failure and allow you to glide with almost no speed lost, and maybe get to the closest airfield. Now, radiators. That's simple. If you have an enemy on your 6 and you absolutely must gain some more speed, close the folds. If there's no one around and your engine could use some cooling, open them up. Finally, the switching engines option. It's rarely used, only when you want to control a damaged bomber, for instance. If one of its engines is damaged, the thrust will be unbalanced, spinning the aircraft. To prevent that, you'll need to turn off the opposing engine and feather the rotor blades. Well, looks like we've covered this advanced topic. It's been very satisfying, so it's time we answered some of your questions. The first question was sent in by a player called Tanker4U1234. How to effectively play the QF 3.7 RAM and its German counterpart, VFW? Hi there. These machines' main advantages are their extremely powerful guns, capable of piercing the frontal armor of any enemy at their BR. But such firepower is compensated with very weak armor. Both machines are vulnerable even for machine guns. So your best tactics on the QF 3.7 Ram and the VFW is keeping a long distance. If there is no such positions available on the map, you should stick to your allies, driving in the second or even the third line. Let them take the hits with their thicker armor while you're sniping the enemy. Aragon Wolf asks, how does the suspension controls work on all tanks or just the modern tanks? Hi there. Suspension control is only available on tanks with hydropneumatic systems, such as the MBT and the KPZ-70 or the Japanese Types 74 and 90. Another question comes from Galactic Threat 21. What is the difference between fighters and interceptors? How can I tell? Any tips? Hi there. Interceptors are basically fighters too, just ones that specialize in climbing and shooting down enemies quickly. They also generally have powerful guns to fight bombers. Interceptors also spawn in the air, which gives them an advantage in gaining altitude earlier to employ the boom and zoom tactics. The Red Avenger 13 Seuss writes, what does the new mechanic, laser warning, mean? Hi there. This mechanic is available on tanks with radar warning receivers. Their special equipment can detect enemy lasers and give the crew some time to hide or use smokes. And the last comment for today was written by Respecting MP40. You forgot the most important part to winning in Normandy, shooting down all the balloons. Hi there. True, if your team has conquered the skies above Normandy, the pilots will be forever grateful to tankers if they shoot down the balloons. Just be careful not to help your enemies instead. My goodness, time flies. That's it for today. You've been watching The Shooting Range by Gaijin Entertainment, and the next episode will premiere the following Sunday at 4 p.m. GMT, or noon Eastern Time. Subscribe and click the bell if you don't want to miss our next videos. Don't forget to leave a like, master those manual controls, share your thoughts and comments, and see you next week. You betcha.